My name is Sue McEvoy. Been a guide up here for 8 years now, and am a member of the Redstone Historical Society. But if you're not familiar with the current status of the castle, it's privately owned. It was sold at a real estate auction by the IRS in 2005, and a man from Pasadena, California, named Raleigh Demetrius paid $4 million for it. And his plans are to open it as an exclusive hotel, a resort with a restaurant and a pool and a spa. But while he's been undergoing this renovation, and they had to do the full heating and plumbing system, a lot of electrical, you can see they're installing lawn sprinklers out on the grounds this summer. While he's been doing this for the past 2.5 years, the castle sat completely closed. And some of the merchants in Redstone, Bob at Tiffany's, and some of the other merchants convinced Raleigh this summer to be open on this limited basis of tours while he's undergoing the renovation. And that's why they're primarily on weekends. And so we're very gracious to him to be able to do this once again for everybody. And there's no timeline for when that renovation will be completed. But originally, of course, the home belonged to a man named John Cleveland Osgood. And at 1900, John Osgood was one of America's wealthiest industrialists, making his fortune in coal and steel. But really, this home and the town of Redstone is John's only legacy. So the story I'll tell you today is how that all came to be, was for a while, and then went. But of course, at 1903, when you came here as an Osgood or a guest, you arrived by rail. Just across the river, the Osgood's private car had its own rail spur. Horse and carriage would be waiting for you there. You'd come up that same gravel entrance into the porte-cochere where you stepped out of the house into the carriage. And then they brought the carriage over here, and this little extension of the building with the E. Howard clock is a hand-pull elevator. Goes to 3 levels in the house. So your big steamer trunks were unloaded there. The horses could have been watered out here in the courtyard as well. And the block of marble from 12 miles to the south was a gift to the Osgoods on completion of their home. One of the first blocks hand-chipped out of the Yule quarries and hauled here by specially reinforced cart and mules. And then the dragon functioned as a fountain. He's a little rusty just yet. But the carriage was then taken out that second set of doors and kept over at the stables and carriage house, the big building next door. Might have noticed it coming up the hill. At any one point, the Osgoods had far more many staff than they had guests, and this whole southern wing of the building is and was the working part of the house. Laundry, kitchen, housekeeping. Rooms for their valets. And on the second floor, there were even 9 small bedrooms sharing baths for staff. And we don't tour this servant wing, nowhere near in its original condition, also somewhat under renovation, but that's much unlike the rest of the house. So, we'll go ahead in and pay the Osgoods a visit. How do you think they alerted the servants that all these guests were coming into the house? Where's my volunteer? Right there.
We'll ring the bell.
Tell them you're coming.
Marble and redstone
In the wall.
and granite block.
This is just the porch.
Inside the home of John Osgood. John was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1851. Fairly well-to-do family. His mother was Mary Hill Cleveland, so founders of that city in Ohio are in his family. Father's side of the family traced their roots coming over on the Mayflower, founders of the city of Andover, Massachusetts. Unfortunately for John, by the time he was 10 years old, both of his parents had passed away. It was the time of the Civil War. The money in the family quickly ran out, and John and his other siblings were doled out to different relatives. John being raised by some Quaker relatives in Rhode Island. Age of 14, takes his first job, clerk in the cotton mills, $1.50 a month. He then works and puts himself through night school, graduating from the Peter Cooper Institute. And a lot of young industrialists will graduate from Peter Cooper. And At the age of 19, he was referred because of his good business sense and education to a banking firm in Ottumwa, Iowa. And it'll be this work experience that John sets his sights and goals, his ambitions for what becomes the rest of his life. Because in the banking industry, John noted that many young men had already made their fortunes not on striking silver or gold, but in the coal and fuel industries. So John knew he wanted to be involved with coal, and he then took a position at the White Breast Coal Association, which was also there in Ottumwa. And it was their responsibility to be supplying coal to the Chicago, Burlington, Quincy rail system. And of course, at this point, all the steel's being manufactured in the east, all the coal was coming from the east, but the railroads were looking to develop out here into the west. There's actually a couple of chairs if you want to bring them in from that formal dining room, some of the wood chairs, and you can have a seat right where you're at there. So all the steel being manufactured there. In 1882, this same CBQ rail will finance a trip for young John Osgood to come to Colorado on a coal finding mission. And he travels to all the mines that are here in the state. He gets to Glenwood Springs, hears that there's been a coal discovery, some 30 miles or so to the south of Glenwood, up a valley called the Rock Creek. That's what the first white prospectors named this valley. Of course, they hadn't been here very long, because up until 1880, the valley was treated to the Ute Indians for as long as the river would flow and the grasses would grow. They'd come for generations. It was their hunting grounds. Well, there was a lot of mineral discovery close by. Silver in Aspen, the lead in Leadville, the marble up on the pass. And the prospectors really wanted into this valley. It wasn't until following an incident in northern Colorado called the Meeker Massacre that the treaties with the Utes were broken. They were driven out of the valley and put on reservation. And a small band of these Indians actually escaped over Schofield Pass with their chief, Colorado, set fire to the woods in order to drive off the game, and also put a curse on the valley, saying that no white man would ever prosper. But of course they came in right over the mountains, primarily looking for silver and gold. In 1882, two of these young men are panning for gold 8 miles to the west up this little side valley here of where we're sitting. And in that spring, an avalanche unearths the entire claim that they've been working. Underneath is a large seam of coal, not gold as they would have hoped. That's what Osgood hears about when he gets to Glenwood Springs. Of course, there wasn't any road system yet into the valley, so he hires a guide at Carbondale. They come up on horseback, little trail next to the river, meet up with Perry and Griffith, the gold panners. John inspects this coal deposit, realizing it for what it was, the highest grade of bituminous coal that he'd ever seen. And John was an expert on coal. Instead of purchasing the claim for the CBQ rail, Osgood wanted it for himself. Perry and Griffith wanted $500 for the claim. John only had $250. However, in Crested Butte, he knew another young mining engineer named J.A. Kevler. Osgood and the gold panners hike over Schofield Pass to Crested Butte. Kevler and Osgood arrange the banknote. They buy this 500-acre parcel. John returns to Iowa, adopts two more partners named Alfred Cass and John L. Jerome, starts the Colorado Fuel Company, and all throughout the 1880s, he'll return back and forth to Colorado, purchasing up many of these coal lands that he finds on his first visit. And in 1892, he merges with General Palmer's Colorado Coal and Iron to form Colorado Fuel and Iron. By 1900, CF&I, as it's called, is a working enterprise of some 36 coal camps, ranging from Sunrise, Wyoming to Gallup, New Mexico, several railroad systems, and the only steel rail manufacturing plant west of the Mississippi. The steel plant was located at Pueblo. CF&I was Colorado's largest employer of 19,000 men, and the company was worth $40 million. So in effect, he did strike gold out here. But like the men building the rails, Osgood needed this large labor force. And there weren't a lot of people in Colorado in 1880. So he actively recruited young men from Europe. A lot of Scandinavian countries, a lot of Mediterranean countries. And we imagine as these young men boarded the ships headed for Ellis Island that they too thought they'd get to America and make their fortunes. Streets are paved with gold. And of course they end up in these remote coal camps, working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, living and in the conditions were very dangerous in the mines, and they're living in tents or shacks at best at elevations like 10,000 feet. And Osgood travels around his coal camps, wondering why productivity is low, and he's pretty deplored by the living and working conditions of the men. He's also very anti-union, and there were no strike agitators and organizers in any of these CF&I company camps. And literally, these aren't company towns. Normally, where they discovered the coal, they had to build the road, they had to build the railroad, they had to provide housing, foodstuffs, a doctor for the men. But Osgood's going to take this whole thing a step further, and with the help of his doctor from the hospital there at Pueblo, Dr. Richard Corwin, one of America's first sociologists, they're going to implement this social experiment through all of the camps. And this was in an effort to keep the men from joining the union, as well as to keep productivity high. And if his workers were out on strike, he stood to lose millions of dollars a day. But in any case, they educated the men to speak English. There were some 27 different languages spoken throughout the camps at 1900, and it was dangerous if you couldn't communicate with your fellow worker. Encouraged the men to bring their families over from Europe. Now already your quality of life was better if your family was living with you. They had a camp and plant magazine, so you felt a bigger part of an organization than just the one camp at Newcastle or Sunlight or Cardiff where you were working. And the Camp and Plant magazine was even, each chapter had Italian and Slavic language as well as the English. So until you learned English, you could still feel a part of that and read. So that's going on all around the state, and this was unheard of throughout the rest of the coal industry and the railroad industry at this time. But Osgood really felt like he knew best what was good for his workers, and he paid his men in script, which they could use at the company store. So that's going on all around the state. Here at Redstone, of course, it takes them a little longer to develop because it wasn't even a road yet. And throughout the 1890s, CF&I will purchase all the land from Chair Mountain back down to Carbondale. John changes the name of the valley from the Rock Creek to the Crystal River Valley, and they tie on to the Denver Rio Grande that was already in place running up to Aspen at Carbondale. The end of the Crystal River Valley toll road line, standard gauge, was a little coal deposit called Placida. And these days, Placida is where you turn to go into Marble. But because the coal was still yet 8 miles to the west, they had to build another rail system to bring the coal from the mine down here to Redstone where it would be processed. And this was quite an engineering feat. This rail spur was named the High Line. It was a narrow gauge. They laid 12 miles of track to cover the 8-mile distance, crossed Coal Creek some 22 times on wooden bridges and trestles, climbed from 7,000 feet at town to 10,000 feet at the mine. And this High Line spur, it said its first engines could only pull 7 of the Ingoldsby patent dump cars up that 4.5% grade. And in later years when they had a larger engine, it said that 13 cars only straightened out one time in a solid line as they went and snaked up that narrow valley. But Osgood nicknamed the route the Columbine route because all the beautiful wildflowers that were closer to that 10,000-foot elevation. So they're at Coal Basin, the name of the mine, deep tunnel mining. Some 60 homes constructed for the workers there. They had a clubhouse, place to play cards and enjoy beverages on Saturday nights. Probably came to Redstone once a week on their day off
and used to say they had 3 seasons: July, August, and winter. It started snowing by now, didn't melt off till the 4th of July. And in January of 1903, a snowslide swept the clubhouse right off its foundation across the railroad tracks, and all the men had to come out of the mine to clear the tracks from 20 feet of snow because they would have run out of supplies up there. And there was a rotary snowplow they could attach to the narrow gauge or the standard gauge in order to clear the tracks. Placida used to blow in pretty big as well. But after the coal was loaded, of course, it was brought down here to Redstone, and where you see today the remnants of what were some 200 bricked beehive-shaped coking ovens, all set in place by 1901. This side of the ovens was a tipple, a structure where they brought the high line in, the cars bottom loaded, and in 8 seconds all the coal was deposited. It was crushed and washed before being loaded on top of the ovens by the men with mules and carts. Each oven took 3 tons of coal. It was lit on fire, and then they bricked them back up completely, burning off the impurities and toxins in that high-grade bituminous coal. It was a 48-hour low-oxygen process referred to as coking. And then when the men opened up the oven doors, all these toxic black gases and fumes escaped into the air, and then you're left with now a styrofoamy mass of coal product referred to as coke. And all the coke was shipped out on Osgood's Crystal River Valley Rail over the mountain passes down to Pueblo, where it was instrumental in the making of steel. They had other mines for iron ore, and with the iron ore and the coke, the steel process made Mr. Osgood a very wealthy man by 1900. And here at Redstone, because he's at the height of his social experiment, he and Corwin decide that they can build the model company town. And Redstone looked far different from these other coal camps spread around the West. Each home designed by an architect. They all had 3 to 5 rooms, were all painted different pastel colors. They had plumbing, and for 35 cents a bulb, could tie onto Redstone's electrical system. And it was a hydroelectric generator plant just upstream here in the Crystal River, producing AC current at 1900. Half of Denver and New York didn't have electricity at this point. And the workers rented these homes from CF&I. The single men were lodged down there at the Redstone Inn, took their meals family style. Just east of the inn was the men's clubhouse, also a 2-story wood frame structure. It had the bar, had a library. Osgood himself furnished all the classics to be available for the men, and the structure also had a 200-person seat auditorium with a stage, dressing rooms, and lightings. They had opera events, theater productions, all for the enlightenment and the enrichment of the workers here at Redstone, and the ladies got to use the clubhouse on Wednesday night. The schoolhouse, the fire station, most of the foremen's homes all sat on the hillside above town. Redstone's largest structure was its company supply store, sat close to where the country store is today, and all of your foodstuffs, clothing, cookware was available at Redstone. It was 18 miles each way back and forth to Carbondale. That would have taken the better part of your day off. There was a community garden, community cows, a post office, a doctor's office, an assay office. Redstone had everything except for a church, and John was not a particularly religious man, so he didn't provide that service for his workers. That's how the town looked by 1901. But I haven't told you anything about John and his personal life. We'll back up to 1893, while he's creating this coal and steel empire out here in the West, and he's traveling quite often to New York looking for investors. And that year he'll meet a young Southern belle. Her name was Nani Irene de Belote. She was in her early 20s, had grown up on a plantation in Virginia, traveled in Europe, and was already by profession a writer of purple prose, which was a romance novel in the 1890s. Really steamy stuff. I mean, it was quite flamboyant, probably swept Osgood off his feet. They were married in 1893. He even brought her out here on a bit of a honeymoon, but of course they were just building the coal camp, so there wasn't any place suitable for a lady to stay. They would have stayed in Glenwood at that world-class Hotel Colorado. It had just been completed. And like today, a lot of wealthy Europeans and Americans traveled to Glenwood to partake of the mineral baths, the vapor caves, and at that point, see the wild, wild west. So Osgood does some hunting up on the flat tops. Irene did what she did best, which was to party. And at some point, the management of the Hotel Colorado will ask Mrs. Irene Osgood to no longer be a guest there. Well, by now, John is the 6th wealthiest man in America. He's insulted by this. And he says, I'll build a home in Redstone for my young wife and my guest to stay that rivals anything you have here in Glenwood Springs. That's where he gets the idea to build such a magnificent home out here in his model town. Irene, however, she doesn't want to live in Redstone. She's going to spend the 5 years of their marriage gallivanting about in Europe, riding in the hunt, visiting with the nobles, with or without John, for months at a time. And he starts the Cleveland Press for his young wife. No one else is going to publish novels like Shadow of Desire. And in 1898, John gets wind that Irene's having an affair in Europe with another writer. Well, he's pretty fed up with her behavior by now, has his lawyers drop the papers, and then publishes Irene's obituary in the New York Times. Says she's been run over by a runaway horse. Well, we know he divorces her at this point. It was scandalous that she was having this affair. He belonged to this very wealthy and political society out here in the West. So Irene Osgood never sees this house because they don't start construction until the next year, 1899. That year, Osgood himself travels to Europe, and he's at the court of King Leopold in Belgium, where he meets a young Swedish heiress. Her name is Alma Regina Shelgrim, tall, slender, honey blonde hair, also in her mid-20s. But much contrary to his first wife, Alma was a world-class lady. She was well-educated, spoke several languages, composed music. John and Alma will be married in 1899. He honeymoons in Europe with her, brings her out through Denver. They arrive at Redstone, reminds her of the Alps. And it's John's second wife, Alma, who's so influential on furnishing the home, some of the design of the building, but more so on this Camelot existence that occurs between the Osgoods and the workers of Redstone in these very early 1900s. It takes them 3 years to complete the house. John goes a little over his original $80,000 budget and spends $500,000 building the manor. But they take up residence in 1902, and of course, as I mentioned, you came out by rail from Europe or back east. At Carbondale, he boarded the Osgood's private car. It was named the Sunrise. Took an hour and a half by rail from Carbondale to Glenwood, Redstone, unless there was a rock slide or a snow slide. And then after docking the Sunrise, of course, you arrived by carriage here at the house. The estate was 550 acres, both sides of the river, as far as you can see in either direction. And all of that was fenced in wrought iron, like you see out in the courtyard, and gated as well. You drove by that north gatehouse. It was the blue house along the road, and originally those stone and iron gates sat next to that gatehouse. As you approached the grounds, you would have gone by the greenhouse, the dog kennels, the stables. The little building in the parking lot was their hose house. And in his day, Osgood had a lawn sprinkler system that functioned very well. And they actually diverted Hawk Creek instead of East Creek, like Redstone uses today. This building, 42 rooms, 24,000 square feet. On the front grounds still sits the gazebo, and across the river is the gamekeeper's cottage and his carriage house. The trees block the view of it, but you can see it from the lower part of the road. It's a brown Swiss chalet-looking building. And then the road carried on this side of the river originally, past the hydroelectric plant, past the reservoir, to a big working farm. And they raised all their own cattle and hay and produce. A lot of workmen came and went along the southern road, so there was another gatehouse there. Sandstone block like this building with the matching arches and big iron gates. So that's how the estate looked at the time. But we'll go ahead and walk around and see some of the rest of the things that the Osgoods were so nice to leave behind. Any questions thus far?
What was this room used for?
Oh, this was the sun porch, just something a little brighter and sunnier. We'll come back out here for more history and I'll talk about this. We'll go to need for the rest of the tour. We don't sit in all the furniture. Obviously, there's not enough, but we'll be back out on the sun porch in a little while. And of course, you are welcome to take photographs. And when we're upstairs or at the end of the tour, you have time to come and get pictures of the rooms without people in them as well. But John's architects were named Theodore Boll and Harnois, and they designed all of those other structures that I talked about in Redstone. The clubhouse, the workers' cottages, the inn, even a structure behind the coke ovens on the way to the mine called the Bighorn Lodge. And this is where John's board members and business associates would have stayed. They even had 2 lanes for bowling in the Bighorn Lodge. But we know from the registry of that lodge, they used the structure for less than 2 years because it was situated so close to the toxic gases being produced in that coking operation. But Boll and Harnois would have studied back east as well as in Europe, and they designed the home as an English Tudor, yet it's really its own unique architectural style because they used the local stone. And all the stone was hand-cut and quarried just across the river by Austrian and Italian stonemasons. It's a maroon geological sandstone, and it's actually called Mount Casa. But in addition, John and Alma didn't want their guests to feel as though they were traveling to this remote coal camp in the middle of the Wild West, but more so like they were stepping back in time into a European-designed hunting lodge. And hunting was their sport. We can just imagine John back at the board table in New York saying, really, JP, you ought to come out, see the model town, stay at my hunting lodge. And each room has a different European style or motif, shows off their knowledge of travel around the world, as well as John's wealth. And this room's done in the style of an English Great Hall, 18-foot ceilings, English oak wood panel. All the wood paneling in the home being designed by a man named Gustav Stickley, went on to make himself a pretty famous name in American furniture making. All those structures I described were furnished in Stickley, and the inn has a large collection of it.
Even the workers' home?
Yes, brought it out by the trainload. I'm sure your house is full of Stickley. But because the hydropower was also available, house is originally wired and plumbed, and all the fixture work, again, being designed specifically for the Osgood home by a company from New York. They were branching out from doing stained glass work to doing the fixture work, Tiffany and Sons. And these globes, for example, under the chain links in brass is a lion's head motif, pineapples design, and then the angel's heads coming out next to the glass each match the fireplace and iron set here. And there are 14 fireplaces in the house. They connect into 6 chimneys. They heated with wood and a forced air coal system. But obviously this one is sandstone again. And underneath the trophy elk, who's also been there for the 100+ years, is a family crest. Now, John Osgood was very much American born and bred, and very much a self-made man. But he belonged to that American industrial aristocracy, the robber barons, who created such huge sums of wealth in the days before government regulations and taxes, the Vanderbilts, Rockefellers, Morgans. And John was very much a part of that. So he used his Osgood family crest traced back to England, lion holding a sheaf of wheat, signifying strength and bounty, the knight's helmet, and the shield tilts towards England, going back to the border wars between Scotland and England. Latin inscription pectore puro, meaning pure of heart. Now there's lions all over the head. I mean, there's lions all over the house. This was his letterhead, his insignia. And while John's friends and family always called him Cleve, from the family Cleveland name, his business associates referred to John as the Lion of Redstone. And we imagine he was pretty ruthless in this coal and steel industry, making the $40 million in 15 years. Not exactly an easy thing to do by being a nice guy. So in any case, Cleve, or the Lion of Redstone, when the house became a bed and breakfast, there wasn't a lot of artwork, there weren't a lot of photographs here in the home. John was a very private and personal man. But in the 1980s, the owners of the B&B will hire a local artist, meaning Jack Roberts. And Jack lived in Redstone, in the home that Osgood lived in before building the manor, and was able to interview children of the coke oven workers, people who had known the Osgoods, as well as read all that Camp and Plant magazine. So each painting depicts some story of life here at Redstone at the time, and I'll talk about them as we see them around the house. Cleve standing in the formal dining room, toasting his guests, something the artist discovered. John only dined at a round table set for no more than 8 persons, and he was not a big social entertainer. Seen off of the front lawn down at that gazebo, where on a Sunday afternoon the Osgoods, their guests, and even the coke oven workers and families would have been invited up for a performance of the Redstone Company Band. And Osgood himself furnished the uniforms and triple silver-plated instruments for the band. Now, the vases are original to the house. The wall cover in here would have been the same hand-stenciled linen we're going to see in both hallways. It gets painted over at some point. And then the curtains were a green velvet. And of course, fabrics don't last 105 years, but they did manage to salvage the strip of border off of those curtains. And then on the north wall, a scene still repeated today, where the Osgoods are coming back from Redstone in their horse-drawn sleigh. And then Alma seated here at her gold-cased piano, one of the pieces we do no longer have in the house. But almost everything else in this room would have been an original piece to the Osgoods. And when the house was completed, Alma's going to take his nickname, Cleve, and attach the Swedish word home, H-O-L-M, means a little house in the country. And the estate was known as Cleve Home Manor, all the time that the Osgoods were here. Okay, well, any questions about this room?
Was he very big in stature?
5'4". Yeah, so he was not a social giant, nor was he staturally a giant.
Was she bigger than?
Yes, and we'll meet them in the next room, actually. I don't know placed on this level. I have to think about that. But the bedrooms, almost all of them have them. But this room, the library, although they called it the study, done in a Persian style. It's also very reminiscent of those deluxe rail cars that you would have traveled across Europe or the United States in, spending weeks at a time to get somewhere. And the wood panel is Honduran mahogany. As you leave that room finished with English oak and enter the one finished with Honduran mahogany, they actually press the doors with those 2 opposing woods. Maybe I can get a little demo over here. Go ahead and close the door. You can see the mahogany on one side. Oscar's little lion with his sheaf of wheat on all the door plates on this level, and another one of the heat registers. But the wall cover is a green dyed elephant hide leather, and it's got gold inlay, brass tacked up against the plaster to not have a lot of stitch work, and the ceiling 2-inch square gold leaf. It's been pounded between leather to be cellophane thin, laid on top of linen, and then hand stenciled in this peacock design around the border. At some point, the center panel must undergo damage from fixtures, water damage from fixtures on the second floor. But we do meet Cleve and Alma in the photograph here on the wall. He's the guy in the lighter suit with the cigar, arm extended, and Alma across from him, as you can see, is significantly younger and taller. And she's holding her little skipper key dog. Cleve was quite an important businessman at the time, and he always traveled with his right-hand man, T.M. Gibb, the guy in the dark suit there. And John and Alma never had any children, nor did he have any with Irene. So when they were here at Cleve home, he had a lot of business to do at the coke ovens and the town, the model town. And the stories about Alma are that she would go into the town of Redstone and converse with these coke oven workers and their families, that she was genuinely concerned for their welfare. If somebody was injured in the mine, had their family provided for. If the ladies needed something of the latest fashion, got that into the company store. She hired the educators, the female school teachers for the schoolhouse, provided the curriculum. And literally, here was this Swedish heiress descended amongst the midst of all of these other European workers. And Redstone was about 50% Italian. Also, a lot of the Huns, the Slavic countries, worked here at the coke ovens. So Alma, they didn't refer to as Mrs. Osgood, but they nicknamed her Lady Bountiful because she was so generous and wonderful and benevolent to them. And it was almost feudalistic in the sounds of the goings-on here with the lord and lady up here on the hill. And we always say the house is one aristocratic mile upstream, uphill, and upwind of those coke ovens and all of that industry that was going on at the time. And Redstone looked far different than it does now, being industrial that it was. And Alma is again photographed here above the green marble fireplace, probably from where Pakistan is today. And she's pictured in her electric riding car, so any technology that was available. And you can see the figuration of the drive was more that it looped right up the front lawn there and was lamp lit all the way back down to the Redstone Inn for Alma and her car.
Now, how many people at the time were in town?
There were some 80 houses, so 300-ish in town, and then another 100 plus, 200 plus at Coal Basin. Mm-hmm. So some of the books are original to the Osgoods, Country Life magazines, and even ledgers from the night school. And these men were encouraged to take not only English classes, but they could study mathematics and sciences in the night school here at Redstone. Yes?
Yeah. Were the salaries of the miners paid off through goods at the store?
Osgood paid script in a percentage to them, yes. But they were paid a little bit better than some of the other mines, something like $3 a day.
And they would use the script to go to the stores in the
Yes,
town
they
here.
could, the company store, you could use your script. And probably your rent as well.
The Pullman train cars did something similar. Were they copying what he did, or was he copying Pullman?
The bottom loading?
No, building the village for the people who
Oh,
live in the community.
I don't think he actually copied them, but yeah, there's not a lot of, it's not something that was going on in every place, but yeah, there are similarities. And it's called industrial paternalism.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And it goes back to Europe as well. Noblesse oblige, where, the nobles felt obligated to the peasants and servants that they had. So yeah, good question.
Were the workers then better off than they would have been otherwise?
Probably, yeah. But
So it wasn't all bad.
no, it wasn't all bad. But there was no union either. Okay, go ahead and take a look at the photos and some of the things in the room, and then we'll gather in the next room. And she was rumored to be a Swedish countess, but we've never really tracked that down. Okay. Well, this room would have been decorated very femininely. It's the ladies' music parlor. And the function of the room was that after the dinner, the men went downstairs with Cleve for brandy, billiards, and cigars, and the women came in here with Alma, catch up on the latest world events, have some tea, do a little music. The original, it's French in its motif, French silk damask wall cover, and a frescoed plaster ceiling. And you can see the oval has been disrupted by the addition of the bath and closet in the room, but also Carrara Italian marble fireplace. Even though Osgood had a quarry across from the old quarries, they had marble 12 miles away, all the quality stone of the day was considered to be coming from different parts of Europe, and this is Carrara Italian. Nowadays, they still quarry up in marble. They ship it out over the seas to Carrara, Italy, where all the masters still work, and then they bring it back. But the two mirrors are also pretty spectacular pieces to still have. They're both gold leaf framed and lined not only with mercury, but with diamond dust. They're diamond point mirrors, so they should never lose that reflective quality.
That's why they're still so clear.
Yeah. Some of the antiques you might have, some of the other ones upstairs in the house, you get a streaking, a little blackening in the glass. But
Did
never
Osgood
do
have
that.
anything to do with the marble quarry up there, or was that a?
yes, he actually he bought a quarry right across from that one, but he's so busy with coal and steel. He does, however, help introduce it to the wealthy and political society by bringing some of it to the Chicago Exposition in 1893. But they don't extend Osgood's line from Placida into marble until 1907. Originally, they were trying to build the rail from Crested Butte, and they'd get about a month of work done in the summer, and it would start snowing. So, anyhow, the piece of music here also was sent back when the property became a bed and breakfast, and the letter goes on to say that this gentleman's getting older and he wants someone to have this piece of music. He lived in Redstone between 1903 and 05 in one of the little colored houses. His father worked at the coke ovens, and for Christmas he received this piece of music from Alma Osgood. It's called the Redstone Waltz. So.
Did she entertain some of the workers' wives ever, or did they have friendships, or would that?
I think that they entertained more like the dignitaries and people that came to see the model town. Yeah.
Kind of like a caste system sort of thing? in that
Somewhat,
age?
yeah. Uh-huh.
Can that be restored?
That one can. I don't think you'll ever get gold onto the center of
No,
that
yes.
one. Mm-hmm.
The relief, though.
That can be restored,
It
yes.
can
Yep, so hopefully we'll see some of that work start inside. Okay, well, we'll gather in... yeah, and I barely would have met him. Well, even though this is in the front of the building, this was the main entry of the house, because as a guest or an Osgood, you came and went by carriage all of the time. And you step into this sort of dark little hallway, but remember it was a hunting lodge. And people who saw the house still in the 1920s and 30s remarked on how many bearskin rugs, trophy mounts, and muskets all over the walls. When you went down to Osgood's game room in his office level, there was even a full-size taxidermied polar bear standing there. But bearskin rugs don't
So is
last.
that the front door?
Yep, that's the front door. But like fabrics, those didn't stick around forever. Here's that hand stenciled linen that I described was the same wall cover in the great room. Green and gold. Pineapple design, universal symbol of hospitality. Yeah, welcome. And if you look closely at the paper, it's lighter by the ceiling and darker by the floor, creating the illusion of more space and brightness in this little dark hallway. And then our one piece of Stickley furniture is the umbrella stand in the corner of the room. You can see very simple oak and iron, differing from these marble-topped, hand-carved leather brass pieces that the Osgoods have so nicely left behind. And then the reproduction of the photo in the other corner of the hall is Nani Irene de Belote, Osgood's first wife, who meets with that unfortunate horse accident.
Oh, yeah.
And here's Cleve, portrait done by that same artist. And Jack actually, with his sense of humor, makes Cleve look a little taller, standing in front of the fireplace, than the 5'4" that he was. Alma, photographed in her riding attire. She was said to have been quite a huntress and had all those beautiful thoroughbred horses. In Camp and Plant magazine, they even described how they had to get the horses used to the elevation as they brought them in. They couldn't just bring them in to 7,000 feet. They'd have to keep them someplace by Denver and acclimatize their animals as well. But 1904, Alma is said to have bagged the first bear of the Colorado season. So we attribute some of the game heads to her. And then she's depicted as we go across the staircase handing out Christmas presents to the children of Redstone. Who asked about if Alma entertained the workers? Yeah. Well, this story, of course, wasn't difficult for the artist to find out because this is something these people are going to remember. She had the children of Redstone each write to Santa Claus. She took the letters. She and Osgood went shopping in October, November in Chicago and New York, came back. These kids got the best doll, the best drum, the best wagon that she could find. And so that's the story depicted there. And one of my other favorite stories about her is that she took all the school children, made them lunches, and took them to Marble when the train was completed. So she did, sounds like she really did enjoy being here with her people. And then, of course, they remembered what Alma served them for dessert because it was red and it jiggled. On that note, we'll go around the corner to the dining room. It's red, you'll see it in there. Formal dining room of the house, and it's done in the style of a Russian tea room. Russian ruby red velvet wall cover. Again, Honduran mahogany panel, rubbed with a cherry stain to bring out more of that deep, rich redness into the room, red having been the color of royalty, and a gold leaf ceiling in very fine condition, 4-inch squares in this room. Lots of original furnishings here in the dining room as well, but what kind of table did Mr. Osgood dine at? A round table. This piece sat in the library. It was their desk for letters and reading and writing. And they even go so far as to drill lamp cord holes through this beautiful piece of mahogany. But John's table, now in the corner, would have sat under that third beam with its 8 leather chairs, another small round table here in front of the fireplace, maybe for just the two of them to dine. The sideboard, the case with the crystal are all parts of the matching set. And they had a 900-piece set of silver, rumored to have been from the King of Spain, which gets vandalized in the 1970s. But there's a handful of pieces. And of course, it was a very formal dining experience here with the pocket doors all drawn shut. And the butler, would be the butler today? No, I get to use you a lot. Yep, the butler's it will. Yeah, just turn the whole hand up. And the butler accessing the kitchen through the hallway here. But of course this room's really pretty dark. It doesn't get a lot of direct sunlight. And Alma realizes that as they're building. So she had them enclosed with the windows, that sun porch. And after you take a look at those things, we are going to go back out. I'll finish history, some of it, before we go upstairs to the bedrooms. So go ahead and after Osgood. Okay. Is that all of us? Okay. Well, you can see these big rough cut walls and great big stone windowsills as though you were going to have this open air porch, but they just enclosed it with windows. And it's not an extension of the building because Alma's bedroom's right up here above us. And you find the inlaid floors just in this room, and in the room above us, her bedroom, the main level that we've been on thus far, they did redo the floors 7 years ago, but they didn't do the upstairs or the downstairs. So the one in her bedroom should look just like this one if they get around to finishing that up. And then again from here, the original estate, as far as you could see in either direction, with Osgood obviously not looking out, seeing any other houses other than the gamekeepers. And the trees have grown up incredibly in the last 50 to 100 years. When you went along the rail where the road is now, you would have just looked up here and seen this grand expanse of Cleve Home, its carriage house, and they even had another coachman's home next to that probably burned down. But and John would have had a view of the workings of those coke ovens without having to be exposed to the fallout from the toxic vapors and things like that. So one of my hunting stories involves John's good friend, President Theodore Roosevelt. And while Rockefeller and some of these men were not big fans of Mr. Roosevelt, perhaps he liked Osgood's social experiment. And he would have come out here quite often hunting, and in 1903, he was actually staying in Glenwood Springs at that Hotel Colorado, had gone up out of Newcastle onto the flat tops, hoping to get a trophy bear. And he gets back to Glenwood, is disappointed because he didn't get his bear. And the housekeepers at the hotel stitched together several little pieces of cloth in the shape of a bear for him, leaving it in his room. And if you didn't know, that was the origins of the teddy bear. But when he came up here to see John and Alma, they too knew he was disappointed, told him to sit out on the front terrace with his brandy and his musket. And they sent the gamekeeper across the river, and in that meadow with the subdivision in it now, that was part of the estate called Deer Park, they actually had pens where they kept as pets some trophy deer, elk, and bighorn sheep. So the gamekeeper went across there, released some of these trophy animals, ran them across the lawn. But the story is that Teddy puts his musket aside and said there's no sport in hunting an animal that's previously trapped. Yes. But 100 years ago, there were far less deer and elk. They were a food source for the miners. There was no regulation on hunting. And Teddy Roosevelt actually started the White River National Forest as much as a game preserve as a land preserve at that time. So, bully for Teddy. But it's going to be a short-lived Camelot existence for the Osgoods and the coke oven workers here of town. 1903. John has just spent $2.5 million on his model company town. That was CF&I's money. $500,000 on his own home. So for the first time, he and his partners are going to list CF&I on the New York Stock Exchange. They needed to raise some more investment capital. Unfortunately, it's going to be one of John's competitors, a man from the Midwest named John Bet A Million Gates, had the patent on barbed wire. He's going to buy up 45% of the stock, the $2 million investment. John Osgood hated John Gates. His intention was to merge CF&I with U.S. Steel. Osgood couldn't stand the young upstart, so he refuses to sign over the stock note, and he was the chairman of the board. They refused to let John Gates into their stockholders meeting that they have here in Colorado. It's all upheld in the Colorado Supreme Court, but the stock plummets. John Gates loses $2 million that year in 3 months. In order to salvage CF&I, J.D. Rockefeller and George J. Gould make up this $2 million investment. This gives Rockefeller a controlling share in the interests of CF&I. Of course, this doesn't happen overnight. So Osgood, with the help of his partners, diverts some of his assets out of CF&I into a second coal company called Victor American, instantly second largest to CF&I. His partners, Kebler, Cass, and Jerome, been with him for 20 years. When it's all said and done, get no stock in the new company, and they've lost all their shares in CF&I. Each of them is suing John Osgood in 1903, and they all die. One of a heart attack, one of a stroke, and the third even commits suicide. This is pretty stressful, major takeovers and turmoils to both companies, really. But Osgood emerges with his Victor American, keeps the Crystal River Valley Rail and some of his other camp plants, but he even loses Coal Basin to Rockefeller as well as the steel plant. So as time goes on, Rockefeller is still coking and coal mining here, but only until 1909. By then, there's far more many coal deposits discovered closer to Pueblo. Coke ovens are becoming obsolete in the processes of making steel, and it's not economically feasible. So Rockefeller closes the mine here. That lays everybody off. And they board up all the workers' cottages up in Coal Basin, give the men a week to get their families and possessions out, and then they also board up all of the homes in Redstone. John and Alma return here sporadically till 1911, and then Cleve home as well. Windows are shuttered, mothballed. He would have had some men come up from Carbondale to shovel off roofs if the snows got too heavy. But as this is going on, between 1913 and 14, there will be a long labor dispute. And Osgood's policies, what Rockefeller was doing in the coal camps, did nothing to prevent the men from at least walking out in sympathy. So following this 2-year strike, J.D. Rockefeller wants to break the strike and end it. In a little company town in southern Colorado called Ludlow, the state militia has been keeping peace for 2 years. He hires some of his own men to infiltrate the militia, go in to break the strike. They're shooting and killing these striking miners. Innocent people are being killed. The women and children all hide under the tents of the encampment that they're living in, but the tents are set on fire. And 13 women and children are killed, along with these striking miners, in an incident called the Ludlow Massacre. This brings to the American forefront what's going on in these company towns and coal camps. We don't hear any more from Alma Osgood after this. She goes back to Europe. At some point they divorce. We never hear why or when even. But as I mentioned, John was a very private man in his personal life. So as time is going on, he's still very wealthy, has an apartment on Park Avenue in New York, his home in Denver, his home in Pueblo. Cleve home stays boarded up, but with his health starting to decline due to lung cancer, in 1922, he's at Hot Springs, Arkansas, a mineral bath. And there he's going to meet a third young woman. Her name was Lucille Reed. She was from New York City, also in her early 20s. Wealthy, well-educated, but not wealthy.
And he's
Lucille,
how old? By the end?
70.
He's 70 something by the end?
69 or 70.
Oh,
He's
geez.
right about there. Yeah, 70.
Great-granddad.
Uh-huh. So Lucille and her girlfriend actually went to Hot Springs shopping for a wealthy husband.
Oh.
And she met Cleve, they're married, they travel a little bit, but of all the places in the world he can spend his final years, he wants to come back here to Cleve home. Now it's 1924. Place has been boarded up for over a decade. Needs a little renovation. 165 carpenters, electricians, and plumbers are all hired to come out to Redstone that summer. They renovate the inn from the lodge for workers to a lodge for guests. They have to put the hydroelectric plant back together to generate electricity. They spend a year working here at Cleve home, add steam radiant heat, replace the roof, any of the fixtures, anything that needed to be brought up to the standards of 1924 is done at that point. And John and his third wife, Lucille, arrive here in 1925. So they're living in the house. They have a whole stable full of horses once again. Family come out to visit and go hunting. And for New Year's Eve of 1925, they even plan a grand masquerade ball here at Redstone. The greenhouse is full of roses. The staff is busy preparing. All the guests have arrived. But the night before the party, John's health takes a turn for the worse. Lucille cancels the event, and he dies here in the home 4 days later. So that's January 1926. In his will, he leaves everything to Lucille. His brother Charles, the Osgood side of the family, don't really get any of these riches. $4 million in cash. The Victor American. Cleve home and the whole town of Redstone. She proves the will and then burns it along with all of his personal and business papers in the fireplace in accordance with his wishes. So that's part of the reason why we don't know much about Mr. Osgood's personal and business life. And he probably didn't want people to know what had happened between Kevlar, Cass, Jerome, and himself. So he's able to do that. I'm going to leave the history there for the moment, and we'll go upstairs, see the bedrooms, and then I'll finish the whole story downstairs in the game room. So, the bedroom level of the house. And as you look across the courtyard, remember I described on the second floor those small bedrooms that were used for housekeepers and staff. Never was and is not any connective entryway on the second floor between the staff bedrooms and the Osgoods and their guests' bedrooms. Every level of the house has 2 staircases, one for the Osgoods, one for the staff. And you can see in the hallway how the wood panel changes, the windows are smaller, above the light switch is one of the call bell systems that would have been in place, and in the hall is a little speaker tube that yells down to the kitchen hallway, and the sliding door in that hall is the one that accesses the elevator, but it's on the ground floor, so it's locked. John and Alma had their own separate bedrooms, sign of wealth in the day. They connect between her bathroom and his hallway. And then out of her sitting room here, the window with the lace curtain was designed as a peering window so that she could look down when her guests arrived, time her entrance out here onto the stoop, and also see what everybody else was wearing. But of course the story about Alma is if she looked down and one of the ladies wasn't dressed as finely as the rest, she herself would dress down to make the woman feel more comfortable. And John's architects could never know he'll have these 3 20-year-old wives and not have children. So they designed the nanny's room and nursery up here on the 3rd level, and you're welcome to go up there. That's about as far as you can get in the house from Alma's bedroom, but your nanny would have raised your children. And of course, Charles and his family did use that suite. 5 guest bedrooms, renovated for the bed and breakfast, but they have their original colored tile fireplaces and some of the bed frames, all the standing sinks, part of the original set. So go ahead and take 10 minutes, 15 minutes. You can explore all 8 of these bedrooms.
What is this thing?
It looks more like a dining type thing.
I think they had it here for the B&B for people to sit in
Right.
their cars. They probably shared one for these 2 bedrooms and shared one for those 3.
But they did have restrooms.
They did have bathrooms and the hand-pull toilets.
Look at this.
That's quite a bathroom there.
That's quite a sink there. Here's some of the lights.
My parents' house had those kind of.
My granddad's did.
My mom and dad's did.
My granddad's did. And see that? Yeah.
Now this has been renovated.
And she said for the bed and breakfast
Yeah.
area. Still.
Yeah, mom and dad's house. Yeah, I saw his picture there. But it's on St.
I lost Skip already. Somewhere. There he is taking pictures of the road. Like I have good sense. Oh, yeah, this one's
Rounded. I don't know what they call that ceiling. Cove.
Did they stay on this floor then?
There's something.
Yeah, they're gorgeous.
Fireplaces.
This is the magazine with like
Oh, that's kind of cool.
It's a neat room.
Sleigh bed.
Two stairs. Wow, they have a bedroom here. It's quite unique, isn't it? I don't think it goes all the way down, though. I don't know.
You don't think so?
I think so. I didn't see the other stairs.
See this?
To sleep in this thing.
His nose is too small for us.
The house was the men's level. The ladies' part didn't even come down here. And Osgood had his office across the hallway. They're renovating the office and his accountant's office that was next to it. When you're outside on the terrace, you can see there's iron bars just on the windows of his office and just on the doors down here as well. And his safe was in his office, full-size bank safe. He would have had a huge payroll for the coke oven workers, the miners, etc., the railmen, and wouldn't have gotten to the bank very often. So, and all his personal important papers could have been kept in the safe as well. But this room, the game room, has its card tables and pool table. The Elk's probably an original piece. And then this circuit board grounded onto marble would have been your breaker box, your main switch for the house. And it was located in the crawl space coming out of the third floor. But they thought it was kind of a signature piece. And then beyond that door were some of the watchmen's bedrooms, little tiny bedrooms with gun windows and watch clock stations. And then an armory, a place for the men to come in after the hunt, hang up their guns and take off their muddy shoes and all of that. But obviously, again, being renovated. This painting, Jack Roberts shows you about what Redstone looked like, with the tipple in the background, the high-line rail, and the workers loading the coal into the ovens. And then in the hallways, a depiction of coal basin and what the homes up there would have looked like. But Lucille here, as I said, inherited everything after John's death, and then went on shortly thereafter to marry his accountant. His name was Huntley McDonald. And we imagine, like a good accountant, he's got a lot of that cash in the stock market, which crashes in 1929. So, and they're trying to run the inn as a lodge for travelers. But it's the Depression. She's growing prize-winning lettuces, but that's not paying the expenses and taxes on all of those buildings that weren't even being used again at that point. So during the late 1930s, Huntley convinces Lucille to start tearing down some of these structures to get them off of the tax rolls. And that's where more than half of the workers' cottages go. There's now today some 28 of the original cottages. Most of them are on the opposite side of the river, looking towards the river. And in the late 1930s, she's going to give away the gatehouse down at the south end of the property, sandstone block structure, a family ticket block by block to Grand Junction, where it now sits on North First Street. The greenhouse, the centerpiece of it, is out in West Glenwood on their frontage road. She gives away the wrought iron. Prior to the Second World War, there's a big metal salvage effort going on. And that's where the railroad tracks go, because they had been extended all the way into marble, but in 1939 they start ripping them up, and by 1943 that's completed, all the way back down to Carbondale. She's probably selling the artwork in silver. A lot of the buildings, the beautiful big structures get taken down for scrap. And finally, the last thing that Lucille sells in 1944 is Cleve Home for $10,000. Wow. But following the Depression, no one ever thought there'd be industry or tourism here.
To whom? Who did she sell it to?
A family from Denver. who have it for 2 years. And they in turn sell it to the Cook family, who open it up as a lodge. And they changed the name from Cleve Home Manor to the Crystal River Valley Lodge. They operate it as a dude ranch, and you buy a package, come out on the train from Chicago, spend 1 or 2 weeks horseback riding, hunting, fishing, square dancing. That goes on until 1957, when a real estate developer named Frank Kistler takes an interest in the place. He sells the Hot Springs Lodge and Pool to its current owners, repurchases the inn because it had been sold off separately by Lucille, changes the name to Redstone Castle. And Frank's vision was a world-class year-round resort. He had a golf course on the front lawn and built the ski area that you drive by on your way out of the property, just past the stone and iron gates. When he passed on, his other investors didn't have that same vision. It was a private home or owned in partnerships throughout the 60s, early 70s, sold on the Pickens County steps for $1 million at some point. And then in 1974 was actually in danger of being torn down for condominiums.
Oh, wow.
So a newspaper man from Grand Junction buys it, spends 12 years renovating it and $2 million more, and opens it up as a bed and breakfast. So it looks very much like it has for the past 25 years. He had it for sale in the late 1990s, got it back in foreclosure, and it actually went up for auction in 2000, where a couple spent $6 million on it. And in yesterday's Glenwood Post, it explained how all those people are just getting sentenced because they embezzled the monies that they used to buy it at that point. And following a 2-year investigation by the IRS, it was seized. And took the IRS in 2003, they seized it. Took them 2 years to clear the title before they put it back up for auction, where Mr. Demetrius paid the $4 million for it in 2005. So that's the history of the house. Osgood's coal basin mine sits there from 1909 when it's closed throughout the 20s, 30s, 40s. And in 1950, Mid-Continent Coal Company takes an interest in that same big 500-acre parcel. They have to build a road system up from Carbondale, open up 4 more deep tunnel mines. They were doing a long wall process of mining in about 3 miles. And it was considered to be one of the world's most dangerous mines. Like Osgood, they had explosions with loss of life due to methane gases. But they operate for 50 years and pull out millions of tons of coal and then declare bankruptcy in 1991. And since then, the Forest Service has done a big reclamation. You drive up 3 miles to a gate. Now it looks a lot like it did when Mr. Osgood first saw it, other than a private inn holder bought a claim and is going to build his own large private home. So that's my tour for today.
So you can drive up to the gate, and then how far
You
away
can
is
walk.
it?
13 miles, you have to go around the park. It's a ways, and it's hunting season, a lot of hikers,
Yeah.
hunters.
Wear an orange day.
But you can go up there.
You can, yes.
Are there any buildings left up there?
There are none,
Okay.
but Osgood's Lamp House is on the Redstone Boulevard. It serves as the museum, and it's definitely worth, if you're on the boulevard, poking your head in there, because there's a lot of photos from Redstone's heyday.
A question,
Yes.
what's the current owner plan to do with this building?
An exclusive hotel and a resort with a restaurant and a spa.
And how soon is that?
There is no timeline.
Okay.
Mhm. Yeah.
How much has he put in it already besides the?
Well, the heating and plumbing was renovated, and he's been heating it, of course, in the winter too, just not today. The lawn sprinkler system was done, something else big.
So the septic.
Fireplaces are being done,
Septic.
but the septic has not been done yet. It is not commercially zoned right now. That's why it can't be open operating. So there's a lot to do. He wants to do all the roofs, but you gotta go through several layers of historical preservation permits for that.
Is this on the National Historic?
Mhm.
And when the IRS had it, the Redstone Historical Society, while they couldn't find a preservation buyer, they did get an easement put on some of the interior of the building. That main level we were first on, most of those rooms, anything that's attached inside the building that's original has to stay.
Including the elk.
No, I don't think so. Because, furniture is not, it's a furnishing, but probably not the elk.
Is there a story about the candlesticks out here? I heard
Those
that
predate
last night.
Mr. Osgood.
Do they?
Yes.
I've heard.
They were left here by Frank Kistler. He was a big donator to the church. So they would have come along then. Yeah, well, what a great interested group. You had a great day to be on a tour today.
Thank you.
You're welcome to go out on the terrace, and if people have more questions, I'll be happy to answer them too.